Hello and welcome here. My name is Constantin Kogan, and I'm your host at Holistic Investments. And I'm delighted to have today Reshma Patel, who's a future comptroller in New York. And hi, Reshma.
Hi, Constantine. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you today.
Likewise, Reshma. I think we were introduced by mutual friends in the crypto space. But before we start talking about crypto, I just want to say that besides the fact that you're running for, a very important position, more like in a political, local level, I would say that you're also an immigrant. You came to this country from India, and your family, this built a completely new life from the ground up, and you graduated from MIT, and you're now like a successful, I would say, politician, right? And becoming a person who actually can change others' lives. So this is important, and I want to just emphasize this aspect before we go to, because most of my guests, you're the first guest that has any affiliation to political career, which is really exciting for me. It's an honor. And I want to make sure that people understand that this is not just like another endorsement, and this is just because I genuinely believe that whatever I've read in your political statements can actually change the life of New Yorkers for good. And just in case, I always do it like if we touch some of the sensitive topics, financial level. So I throw a disclaimer. So this content is informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or any other advice. So again, it's a pleasure to have you here, Reshma. And let's just talk a little bit about your story. How did you start your career, and how did you get from where you started, from being an immigrant, to now becoming the next NYC comptroller?
Yes. So it has, not been a direct path, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about it. And I am an immigrant. I came here as a child with my parents, and when we first came, my parents, when they became U.S. citizens, I was 8 years old. And at that time, I helped my mother study for her citizenship exam. And that's when I got interested in U.S. government. And because my parents came from a country where there were lots of failures of government, like a lot of immigrants who come to this country, right? So they had this idea that America was better, right? And things were better, government was better. And so I always kind of grew up with that idea that you can make change and your lives can be better if you have the right government. And, unfortunately, as an adult, and especially what's happened in this past year, I realized that our government has actually failed us on many levels at some point, during the last few years. And that's what brought me to want to run for city comptroller at this moment. And it's funny to hear myself being called a politician, because that's not what, I've thought of myself for most of my life. I've been working in finance, and I worked in public finance, which is the area of finance where you fund infrastructure for state and local government. So I've been working on, building schools, bridges, even the Highline project in New York City. I worked on the financing for that. And I did that for almost 20 years. And for 8 of those years, I was a financial advisor to the New York City Comptroller's office. And that's where I got interested in this office. And I really know the nuts and bolts of this office. And I believe that given everything that's happened in New York City, this past year, and I really care about the city, I love it and really want to make sure that we're on the right path for the future. And I believe that we need people in this role right now who actually have the technical expertise and know finance in that role. And I also realized, given the disproportionate impact of this pandemic and how different communities, especially immigrant communities that I've been doing volunteer work in, were impacted, I realized that we also needed to have new voices in our city government. And so a combination of those two things has what brought me here. I've also been involved. I'm vice chair of the budget committee on my community board. I'm chair of an organization that works with immigrant communities in Queens and stuff. And so I've done a lot of work on the ground and seen community needs. And I'm hoping to bring those voices to our city government.
And that's exciting, right? And, there are a lot of community and I would say social aspects in your policies. But of course, my audience is more like crypto and blockchain oriented. So I would probably jump into this particular aspect, right? How would you see the New York City becoming more innovative, and how would, we change the circumstances that we already have, certain frameworks specifically we're going to talk about bit license and many other like policies to make sure that entrepreneurs who are willing to establish roots, like here in New York, they will stay here, because it's not a secret that a lot of companies left and they went, Texas, like they went to Florida, they went to Puerto Rico and other places. And it's not only New York, by the way, it's also coming, like same exodus happening from California. So where the taxes are higher and the regulatory framework is a little bit complicated, even though it's robust and it's well defined, but it's just like has certain hurdles. So how do you see that, probably going to change in the nearest time, and how would you benefit this?
Yeah, so I definitely think that our city needs to be more innovative and more efficient. And I think that innovation comes from entrepreneurs, and we need to be more friendly to entrepreneurs. And, we've had good times in the last, decade, and, but now we're at a path where, post-COVID economy is going to be different. And a lot of people have left, as you said, and, so many people that we all know have left. And it seems that a lot of people are going to Florida. And New York City has been the center of financial innovation. And I feel like something like blockchain and is financial technology, right? And we should try to be the center of that as well. And we don't want other areas to get that business, and we need those businesses here. And I think we need to innovate and really talk to entrepreneurs, see what they need. And, bit license is something that a lot of people have said that prevents them from being in New York. And so I think we need to address that, but I think there's other things that we could be doing. We could be more actively investing in new companies that want to come to New York City, and really innovating technology, even using new technologies within our city government.
Yeah, I'm sure. And then, by the way, we'll talk about a little bit how can we apply blockchain practically in New York City. But maybe to touch a little bit about the bit license. So, there was an interesting article in Gemini, one of the biggest crypto exchanges. When they say that New York is crypto regulations are probably one of the most like comprehensive and granular, right? So they are well defined, and we see that the bit license, we have a very clear path of obtaining it. So there are ways how to receive the limited purpose trust charter. And right now, at the moment, there is only probably 6 companies that have this approval, limited purpose trust. So it's a Back Trust Company, Coinbase, Custody Trust, Fidelity Digital Assets, Gemini Trust Company, NIDAC, and Paxos, right? That's all. And then we have about 15 companies who have bit license. Now, I know that there are probably 50 more businesses that would love to have licenses or be regulated, but for many reasons, I would say, right? It's not only because it costs $100,000 and it takes at least like 7 months. Like I think people would love to invest in that. There are certain limitations why people are not willing to even try, and they would prefer to go somewhere where it's just easier. So maybe just elaborate on this. I'm sure you had a lot of concerns and complaints from entrepreneurs in crypto space. How would you change that?
Yes. And yeah, so definitely a lot of people in the crypto space find the bit license onerous, and it's too costly, and it prevents companies from coming to New York. And, I was surprised that the Gemini article came out this January, I think it was, right? Because in 2015, when New York implemented bit license, this was still very nascent technology. Yeah. And by New York City even trying to regulate it, it gave it credibility. And it was like, oh, this is actually forward thinking, because you're actually thinking about how to give it legitimacy, the way financial services are regulated, right? In New York State. But as the industry has grown, so many other companies who'd like to come here haven't been able to come. Right. And they're based in other places because of the bit license. And I think the state recognizes that too, because last July, they came up with what's called provisional bit license. So a company that's small that wants to do business in New York can kind of go through one of these companies that already have the license. Right. So they're moving in that direction. And I think that's why I was surprised by the timing of the Gemini article, because I would think that there's going to be more movement and more deregulation happening in this space as New York sees that, the mayor of Miami, for instance, has, issued a very crypto blockchain friendly policy. And lots of businesses are going there. And if we want to compete, right, we need to rethink what we're doing here. I mean, I see this like, in the 1990s, right, when the internet was still like the Wild West, right? People didn't know what it was, which is kind of like where crypto blockchain has been the last few years. And Silicon Valley decided to take a leap into that space and really became the center. And then you had like 10 years later, New York City is like, oh no, we need to get these businesses here. We're going to do Silicon Alley here. Right. And I think New York needs to be a little ahead of the curve here and be like, no, we're not going to wait until Miami becomes a center and then try to get those businesses here. Let's just, do it now.
Yeah. And I think it's becoming more and more pressing issue because, wholeheartedly, like a lot of my friends moved there, and they realize that first of all, like tax reasons, if you're working in a remote space, a lot of people closed offices and including me, I working from home for more than a year so far. And then you're asking yourself, what's the difference between you sitting physically in New York or not seeing a lot of people, we're just talking through Zoom and that's how we have this recording, right? Or you're being in close to the beach and having the same exact opportunity plus paying less taxes, right? So this is a new battle and a new paradigm shift, what we're seeing. And you've seen Wyoming enact the new laws regulating blockchain and crypto businesses. They're very, very also transparent, low taxes. So it is a battle. So what do you think? What is missing, from the regulators in New York to understand that they're losing, the battle in this battlefield?
Yeah, so I think there has to be more discussion, right? So with the BIT license, that's the, New York State Department of Finance. I am obviously running for New York City Comptroller, but I think that I would talk to the entrepreneurs that I've been talking to, people in this space, right? And really present an alternative plan to the state. Right, which again, I say that's already started, right? And I think that we are moving in a different direction, and really point out that as you said, $100,000 or more, and really the people who are making money off of this are the lawyers trying to get the bid licenses for the company,
as always.
Right? Right, and is that innovation, right? Are we stopping entrepreneurs and then giving money to just for another industry, right? There has to be guardrails, and I understand that, right? For every industry there has to be some guardrails, right? But we really need to think about how we don't stop those guardrails from, helping our economy and from innovating.
Yeah, so it's becoming almost like a closed club, which is interesting. So people who actually have the money and have the they can afford the legal fees, they get there. And some of the folks who would love to get there, they just cannot afford it for now. If you're a startup, you cannot afford having those expenses. So yeah, I don't want to focus on this because I know that your job is different. So. And by the way, I think it makes sense to just elaborate a little bit of what is your almost your job description, what is your role? Because even to me as a person who lives in the city and I respect every person who's changing the city for good. I'm not so well versed in the political arena, right? And so it'd be great to understand so you're almost like a CFO for the city, if I understand it, right?
Yes. And, that's the most commonly asked question I get. A lot of people don't know what the city comptroller is. Yeah. And it's the CFO of the city, and also the city's chief auditor. Mm-hmm. And in our city, the city comptroller is responsible for holding the city accountable and has oversight of all 55 of the city agencies. We have a checks and balance system in our city government. So we have the mayor, and then we have city council, and we have the comptroller. And each of them has a different role, but each of them also checks the other. In our city government. And the comptroller, notably is the trustee of the city's pension fund, which is $240 billion, actually $250 billion as of the latest valuation. And it's the 4th largest in the country and the 14th largest in the world. Which is, significant. And also is all the financing for the capital program goes through the city comptroller's office. So that's all the building of our roads, bridges, and all that goes through the comptroller's office. And, that's a pretty big, it's a $118 billion capital program over 10 years, and $7 billion debt service is paid every year for debt that the city has outstanding that's been issued to fund these projects, so which is, it's a lot, right? And people don't know, even the High Line was funded through bonds. That was a bond issue that I had worked on. And so I don't think most New Yorkers understand how all this infrastructure is financed in our city. And the other big, I think role that the comptroller plays is contracts. And it is important in the contracting process, and all the contracts in the city get approved through the comptroller's office.
The contracts, maybe you can specify which contracts?
So it's contracts with small businesses or any business actually that's doing work with the city, but it's usually small businesses that are contracting, and nonprofits. And the city outsources a lot of work to nonprofit organizations in the city.
Got it. Okay. So I appreciate it. So then another question, you touch a very sensitive topic as well, like which is, like where New York is the fourth largest pension fund in the country, and then like, one of the biggest in the world. So the question is like, when do you think pension funds will actually start allocating to Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation? Because we see that more and more countries are doing that. Like, some states are considering doing that. Like, what do you think? When do you think New York is going to do that?
Yeah. So I would recommend that New York start doing it, when I become controller, which would be next year. The terms would start January 2022.
You're winning votes immediately.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, Norway and South Korea are two countries that, have actively talked about investing in crypto or in blockchain funds. And there's actually two pension funds in Virginia, Fairfax County pension funds, which actually have invested in blockchain. It's not crypto directly in a fund. And actually, they just put some more money in last month because they had done well, right? And so I think it's something that, New York City should consider doing. And, obviously, it's a hedge against inflation and also a hedge against the S&P, right? You're diversifying the portfolio. And when the public markets go down, you have other investments that hopefully will be doing better. And you're, de-risking from that S&P if you have that diversity of investments.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of pension funds actually have an allocation in grayscale trust, right? So that means indirectly there are more and more. Like, I think the Texas one has their, Wyoming for sure, then a few others. Like, so I don't remember the exact list, but so okay, so here's another reason to vote for Reshma, because like once we get the right people in the seats in New York, so we're going to see forward-thinking controllers who understand that it's not only about like promoting the technology, it's also about like literally hedging the risk. We're issuing a lot of debt, as you mentioned, and look, the multi-trillion stimulus packages, they don't have this, right? And we see that I've listened to Jerome Powell, like the speech, like his recent announcement, and I'll be frank with you, I was shocked. It's just like nothing happened. We just issued like several $1 trillion of debt, and like miraculously economy is great. Like nothing happened. Like people left, people are jobless, and everything is still great. So what do you think, what would you say to New Yorkers who are already like, they either considering or they left? What would be their, maybe something you can inspire them to return to the city,
Yeah. So I agree with you, how we've just print money, but at some point we are going to have to stop printing money. And I want to make sure that the city is prepared for that. But in the short run, all the issues that when I decided to run, which was this past January, I was really concerned about what was going to happen in New York City in the near term because of the loss of 631,000 jobs last year, because we had a $5 billion budget hole. All of those things have been solved for us. Not the job creation part, we still need to focus on that. But a lot of the budget issues have all been addressed because we have over $6 billion coming from the American Rescue Plan. And there's also going to be a lot of other investments coming from the federal level. And so I think that New York very soon, we're reopening, May 17th. And I think that you're going to see a huge burst of activity and energy happening. And, the reason why I love living in New York City is the diversity of the city and the arts and culture, the restaurants, like all the different types of food you can get. And I think that with the support that we're going to get from that federal infusion of money, a lot of that, will come back hopefully quickly. And I think the job of the city going forward is going to be, well, once that money runs out, how do we keep supporting these, industries? And how do we bring new industries in? Because there are going to be certain people who don't come back. There's certain companies that will just stay remote. And we're going to have fewer. I think a big concern is a lot of people have become comfortable working from home, right? And if you're not coming into the city, then all the small businesses, the cafes, the restaurants during business hours that used to get a lot of volume aren't, right? And we need to figure out how we recreate that energy that the city had.
So there's another, New York State budget is huge. I don't know, like if people realize that it's like the third one in the country, but like generally if you compare it to other countries, like $1.7 trillion. This is like, this is bigger than several countries combined in Europe, so. Now, but at the same time, it was a really complicated situation. And again, we all understand it was I would say unconventional time, like during the pandemic. But still, the fact how the government, especially the local government, dealt with
Yeah.
small businesses, specifically in hospitality. You mentioned the restaurant. You just touched another painful
Yeah.
point. My friend
Yeah.
has a restaurant for 8 years. He put like his sweat, blood, and tears into it, like amazing restaurant in Soho, and then he had to close it because he did everything to the like to all the guidelines respected, and still they closed like everything. So that was really painful, and I guess like we for some period of time actually killed like half of the best restaurants in the city. So maybe you have some thoughts. How can you restore, these businesses? Because those are hardworking people who were also, contributing a lot to the economy.
Yeah, no, it's really unfortunate because a third of all, I think restaurants have shut in New York City
Yeah.
over all in the 5 boroughs, which is just really sad. And obviously, a lot of places that I loved going to have a shut. And I know small restaurant owners and people who put their whole life into this, and then it's just really sad. And so the way this was handled, we first of all we're just unprepared. And one of the things I'd like to do as comptroller is really deal better with logistics management and really make sure that we're thinking long term, right? Because we're going to see like when Superstorm Sandy happened, it was once in a 100-year storm, right? We see more and more of these crises happening because of climate change and other things. And so I think we need to be more prepared and have a plan in place. And I think that we need to be talking to restaurant owners because I actually, in speaking to restaurant owners, no one knew who at the city to get in touch with, what they should do, who they could complain to. And I think we need better outreach in just terms of, understanding the needs of restaurants and other small businesses and, our city residents in general. But then I think the way we handled it, like in Canada, when every time they had a lockdown, what they did was, okay, 25% of the loss in revenue goes to the restaurant owner, 25% loss is taken by the landlord, and then 50% of the loss comes from the government. Right. So they split the pain that way. Right. Whereas here we kind of were like, OK, well, you're shutting your restaurants and you have to take that burden.
Yeah.
Right. We didn't have a plan in place how to help them. Right. And it should have been shared by different people. Right. And I think that thinking about that, that's hindsight now that's not how we functioned as a country. But how do we support them to get back? And I think one of the things we really need to be doing is investing and making capital available to people, because one of the other things that I learned from work I was doing, especially because it was with immigrant businesses, a lot of people didn't have banking relationships, right? So if you had the PPP program, which started to help, small businesses, you needed to have a bank account with Bank of America to be able to get that loan the first day that it opened, right? And a lot of people got left out because they had a relationship either with a smaller bank or they took money out from, friends and family. A lot of restaurant owners especially do that, right? Because it's hard to get a loan for a restaurant. And then the other thing was that what I learned is a lot of people borrow from predatory lenders. Like people were paying interest rates 13, 14% at a time where interest rates are, less than 2%. Yeah. And it was shocking to me when I really learned about all the problems that restaurants were having.
And yeah, they ended up in more debt, actually.
Yeah, exactly, right. And those, predatory lenders aren't, giving them any relief. And it was a very sad situation. And I think that this city, that's where we can play a role, where we make sure that people have access to banking services. I think making sure that, the way the loan processes works for people who are starting new businesses, we are making capital accessible, but we're also giving them training and resources to be able to either, if it's a business that's been suffering, to recover, or even if someone wants to start a new restaurant or new business, like what kind of resources can we provide them?
Mm-hmm. And what about also the I would say the accommodation? Like there was also a separate crisis where landlords took a huge hit, right? Nobody paid them, so and they were like the tenants obviously they didn't have an opportunity to pay, but again, the irony of this, they had all the other loans, right? They had to pay mortgage, they had to pay insurance, everything. So a lot of those tests, which again, you cannot be 100% prepared, as you've mentioned, like those are like force majeure, as we call it, right? Yeah. But the question is, what is you as a controller, like who's financially savvy, like you're from MIT, and you understand the risk management aspects of it, like what would you suggest for the future to prevent those things to happen and to make sure we're more balanced and prepared?
Yeah, and so I think it goes into planning, because I think one of the things, again, in the United States, I think we're so worried about somebody creating fraud at some point, right? And we don't have trust, right? That we don't react until it's too late, right? So again, I use an example of another country. In Singapore, when they had a lockdown, right? You know what? If you're going to be shut down for 4 weeks, right? 2 weeks, you have to pay people, right? The other 2 weeks, the government comes in and pays, right? They just had a system in place, right? Whereas here, you had to apply for unemployment, wait for it, get it. A lot of people weren't able to get unemployment. If they weren't able to get unemployment, they didn't have the money to pay their rents. And then we had
and if they're self-employed, there's nothing who will pay you, right?
Yeah, and there was nothing. Yeah, and for lots of people, even though they included freelance and stuff, a lot of people just didn't have the paperwork in place to get assistance if they, didn't have that. And so now these people can't pay their rents or mortgages, and for the renters, obviously, so you forgive the rent, but then what happens to the landlords, right? Because they also are paying a mortgage and they have utility bills and whatever else they're paying, right? And there's been some at the state level, the city rent laws are controlled at the state level, has been some help for small landlords, right? Who, you own a multi-family unit and, trying to help with them. But it really was uneven. And a lot of people, again, just didn't know, I would talk to people who didn't know where they could go for help and who they should talk to. Was a problem. But we also just need to think more about how do we spread the pain? Because there was going to be pain from this pandemic, right? Unfortunately, it just was that way, right? But how do we spread it out? And how do we make sure that the government comes in at the right time? And which I think we came in at the end, whereas we could have been kind of earlier on helping people.
Got it. And I think there are other interesting examples coming back to our crypto world, like, for example, you mentioned Singapore. I remembered immediately Portugal, they have this new law where you're not paying taxes. You can file a professional trading activity. You're just buying crypto similar as stocks, and then as a trader, you pay taxes only according to your profits, right? So you're not even paying so it's considered a non-taxable event if you're just buying and with a loss, or just buying and selling, right? As opposed to here, the IRS interprets it even the minute transaction, even today, in it's pretty volatile market right now, Bitcoin and Ethereum go up and down. So I have to actually recalculate, both of the prices, because there are challenge becomes when you're buying, let's say, from a fiat to crypto is one challenge. And then when you're buying from crypto to crypto, that's another challenge. You have to recalculate it, and there are a lot of complication. I think there are so many examples in the world where people are just simplifying, the tax regimes, the help, the support, and then the system in place that, if we're going to learn from each other, so you're right, we can make, a better economy. And people consider New York still an iconic place, know, right? It's just not only, we're not talking about only restaurants, in Wall Street, in New York Stock Exchange. I've read recently that New York is the most mentioned city in the world in the movies. Yes. This is interesting. I'm not surprised by that. Yeah, me neither. But it was just something that you live here, you don't even appreciate, because you kind of, this is just such a natural thing. You see those views every day. But people who don't live in New York, they really they get excited. That's one of the most the best tourist attraction, and I'm sure a lot of people dream to live here, right? Before they actually live here, right? So then they realize there's a lot of challenges, and as in the song, if you can make it in New York, you can make it almost anywhere in the world, right? So I think my question to you, another one, is just what do you think, what will be your small forecast for the future, right? What's going to happen? Maybe we're not, obviously don't have a crystal ball, but let's just try to look in 1 to 2 years. So you're already on the office, right? You have all the possibilities, you have people who support you, you have communities who support you, and businesses who support you. What would be your first steps?
So my first steps, as I mentioned, is really to make sure that we have the long-term planning, because in the short term, we have the federal aid coming in, but make sure that we don't have budget crisis happening in 2 and 3 years, right? So really thinking about that, how do we work more efficiently as a city and cut costs? by looking at with the control's role of auditing all 55 agencies. There's lots of redundancies and overlaps. I think we can find savings through that process, and then creating new revenue sources, which is, again, if we can attract new businesses, new types of, like whether it be in blockchain technology or in other spaces that come into New York City. So one, we reemploy all the people who lost their jobs, and that way we have a healthy economy. Because if we have such a large number of unemployed people, it's going to be, one, a drain on city services, right? Because they're not earning. And then it also, when people earn, they pump money into the economy, right? They're shopping, they're eating out, they're doing stuff, right? So it's really going to be focusing on job creation. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is, most of the jobs that were lost were in the service industry. They were younger people, kind of bottom of the economic pyramid. And it's of concern because every 1 basis point increase in unemployment for a young person could lead to a loss of 8% of wealth over their lifetime. So we really want to make sure that they get a good footing. And one of the ways I think we should do that is with the city's capital program, right? We have all these needs for improving our roads and other projects to kind of make the city more resilient for future climate change, and start those projects now as opposed to the plan for being 10 years, because interest rates are low and it's a good way to create jobs right away that are high paying middle class jobs. And so I'd want one to invest in that to create the jobs, but then also create a city that has, just better infrastructure as well. So I would think that's one thing, be a place where people are coming back to as opposed to leaving, and be a place where young entrepreneurs are coming to because they feel like this is a city that will support them.
Yeah, and it's so interesting you're saying this. Also, I've talked to my friend in Barcelona 2 weeks ago, and he actually mentioned that when he was considering moving there, like in Spain right now, they were fighting for his business. They actually provided him a lot of subsidies on the hub that they were renting from, like, and a lot of like tax benefits, just so you like literally like forget about everything, just come and establish your roots here, build your business from the ground. First year, it's almost like it's on us. So do you think it's feasible that with all those offices that are almost empty right now, let's be honest, so maybe there is a way to create a program which will incentivize businesses to come back to New York, give them a lot of perks, give them a lot of opportunities, and incentivize them to a level that they will come back and, willingly, have their businesses still incorporated in New York?
Yeah, there are definitely incentives as you can offer. And one of the things, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Goldman Sachs at multiple times has told the city they were going to leave, right? And now they've moved to the Brookfield Place office. And when they made that decision, they were given tax benefits to be in that location, right? And you had lots of real estate tax subsidies. The Morgan Stanley building in Times Square, when they moved there, they weren't paying any taxes on that. They had been downtown, and then to really re-energize, Times Square used to be a seedy place before it became like Disney-fied, as they say, right? And, Morgan Stanley became the anchor. The fact that this big Wall Street firm moved from downtown to Times Square really gave it credibility, and the city, to do that, gave tax benefits to them. And so there's lots of ways that the city has been doing that, and we need to think about other ways, that we can bring new businesses here.
I'm sure a lot of people who are just listening or watching us, they're like, great. We're happy for Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, but it's not about us. We're small guys, little guys. So we're talking about middle businesses to small businesses, who they don't have the leverage. They don't have friends in higher echelons of power, to have the dinner somewhere in Soho and ask, hey, give me some tax benefits, right? So we need to think maybe some transparent program. And by the way, blockchain powered, with smart contracts, which will just establish clear path and clear rules for everyone. And that I think is what we're going to do in a fair way. That will excite people. That's at least my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's a good point. And you bring up, because the fact that I automatically thought about these bigger companies. And, the most recent one was obviously that Amazon Long Island City project. The city and the state were giving them so many benefits to come here. But you make a really good point, especially if we're trying to support entrepreneurs, that what kind of incentives do we give them? Right. And I think that, I think some of the things that we can do, you can give tax incentives to smaller companies as you can to big companies, right? But you need a focus on that, because as you said, the bigger companies have lobbyists, which an entrepreneur does not. right? And I think that also, if we're going to have empty commercial space, which we do have right now, really subsidizing that for people so that they can have offices, it brings people back into the city, and it creates this ecosystem too, because you're with a lot of other small companies, you have good ideas coming together, right? That's, I think, one of the great things about New York City is that people come from everywhere in the world with their best ideas. You're getting the brightest people from everywhere, right? Right. And yeah.
And then compete with Silicon Valley, right? For God's sakes, they're taking all the talent, so let's bring back all this talent to New York.
Yeah. In creating Silicon Alley, right? New York did do that little bit of that, right? Trying to create an ecosystem for tech. And, but we definitely should be doing more of that. And I think, at a time where we have space, subsidized space is important, giving tax incentives to people who are coming here. Whether, a lot of early stage companies don't even have revenues, right? So trying to figure out, but if they're paying in other ways, what do we do that incentivizes people to be here because we're friendlier to that than another locality would be.
Yeah, no, 100%. Again, I'm excited that you're thinking about it. I'm excited that you are, like you see, you're brainstorming and you're open-minded. I think that is very important. That's the trait of a leader that wants to hear people and wants to assist people. I'm actually very excited that you're running for this position. And before we wrap up, I just want to we're also human beings, and we have, besides the economy and social aspects and problems, I want to hear a little bit, this. I don't usually even notify people that will ask this question, and that's why it's very genuine. So I'll ask you one recommendation of a book that you would recommend people to read, maybe something related to New York.
So there's so many great books about New York. I think one of the books, which is not just New York, but it's a book called People Like Us, which a friend of mine has written, and it is about immigrants here who run for office, right? Which is something that has inspired me to want to run for office. So I would recommend that book and hearing people's stories
Who's the author?
Why they chose. It's Sayu Bhojwani. So it's not specifically in New York because they have people, all around the country, but it's really great stories of people, and just something that, because I'm deciding to run for office, it's something that I read right before.
No, it's amazing. I think, that's inspiring. Immigrants, they call it a melting pot for a reason, right? And it's I call it a capital of modern Babylon. So that's how I feel. And then the last question is more because my podcast and my show is holistic investment. So I ask people this very simple question. So what's the meaning of life to you?
So meaning of life to me is believing in something bigger than yourself, right? And having that passion to make change.
Amazing. I see you. It's so interesting. You were still prepared. This is how you see the professional public speaker. So you cannot caught you off guard. Amazing. So any closing words, any wishes to fellow New Yorkers who are probably now watching you from Miami Beach, I don't know, Costa Rica, maybe some other Hawaii, and they're thinking, should I come back? Should I not come back?
So I think you should definitely come back. I think we have a bright future. New York is going to, this is an opportunity for us to re-envision our city and think about how we can do things better. And, one of the things that we didn't really touch upon that much, but, in my blockchain policy, I talk about how with one of the most important ways the city interacts with us is through contracting, which a lot of those contracts are available to small businesses. So if you're an entrepreneur, you can try to work with the city. And then I also think that we should be using blockchain in that to increase transparency and really increase efficiency, and making sure that we're really building a trust with all our city residents. And so I think New York is always going to be an amazing place. And I hope everyone comes back, and we are going to rebuild the city, and it's going to be better. I know a lot of people are saying it's become a little bit of cliche, but I do think that this is an opportunity to do things better than we did before. And I hope, a lot of people realize that and they come back. So.
Yeah, and I really appreciate it. You're thinking about the practical aspects of how to implement technology into this, and how to actually ameliorate, and benefit entrepreneurs who are paying taxes, who are trying to support the city, who are the heart of the city, right? And if we help them, I think we will help each other. So I really appreciate your time, Reshma. It was such a great pleasure talking to you. I wish you win. I wish you that you implement all your great policies, and then we'll definitely be looking forward to assist you as much as possible.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And so my campaign website is reshma2021.com. The election is on June 22nd. So for those who are in New York, please vote. The last day to register is May 28th if you are not registered already. And, the other unfortunate part about American democracy is it takes money to run campaigns. And so if you are open to it, any donation, New York City matches donations between $10 to $250 by 8 times to make it a level playing field and keep, big money out of politics and make it possible for people like me who are first-time candidates and new to this to have an opportunity. And for those who are interested, who are in New York on May 13th, we're hosting an event which Constantin will be on the panel for. It's on blockchain. It's about discussing blockchain policy for New York City, and 6 p.m. on Thursday, May 13th. And if you'd like to join, happy to send along information for that.
Yeah, and we're gonna post all the links in the description, so people will definitely be able to go to your campaign website. And I mean, I can disclose, I know you should not, but I have donated and I support you. And I think people should support you because, this is something that, we lack forward-thinking politicians, let's be honest, in New York. And I know it's kind of old school narrative that we have, and I respect it, but at the same time, New York is not the same as it was even 15 years, 20 years before, right? So we do have a lot of technology are coming in, we cannot ignore it anymore. I urge people to visit your website. I mean, we'll definitely, whoever can visit our physical event on 13th, May 13th, please, you're welcome. I'm sure and I also want people to see your video. I think it was really well done. It opens up you as a person, not only as a politician, as a forward-thinking, I would say businesswoman also, but also as a person. And that touched my heart. So I want people to see it, so. Please, in the description, you will have all the links and take a look. And other than that, I look forward to speak again, Reshma. And I think I'll be willing to do this video again when you're already in the office. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear more of your ideas and figure out how we can, make this city move forward and be more friendly to entrepreneurs and blockchain. So,
with pleasure, I will be happy to contribute more.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for the kind words.
Thank you.